Today's episode is sponsored by Coros. Coros is the leading customer engagement platform. From social media to online communities to digital customer care, Coros helps companies authentically connect with customers. Coros connects consumer insights across departments and helps companies run their businesses with their customers, anticipating their needs and accelerating sales. Coros works with over 2,000 brands, including 52 of the Interbrand 100 companies, and powers over 500 million digital interactions every day. Check them out at coros.com. That's KHOROS.com. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week I have the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to one of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. I have Anne Gacutan on the phone, who is Partnership Development Manager Asia Pacific at Arsenal Football Club. I was introduced to Anne by the team at Future, that's FUTR.today. Can you give the audience a quick insight into who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here. I'm Anne Gacutan, as what you said. I am doing partnership development in Asia. That's the new shiny term for sponsorship in Asia. And I've been with the club for 1 year now. Previous to this role, I was at Chelsea Football Club, but my role there is different. I was doing marketing for Chelsea in Asia. And before Chelsea, I was with GroupM on the sponsorship side of things. So I was doing a lot of activations, content production for the brands like HSBC, Unilever, and P&G.
Fantastic. And you're our first football club on the podcast, so thank you so much for that. So Anne, before we learn more about your role and the way you do it, it's customary on the podcast to ask some getting to know you questions. So first question, big question, what has been the biggest mistake that you've made in your career that you survived and you're so glad that you made it because you've learned lessons from it that you wouldn't have done otherwise?
That would be a blessing in disguise, right?
Right.
I think on my end, it's not really a mistake, but more of a disappointment.
Okay.
So after working incredibly hard, right? And I mean, in agency level hard, I got my first promotion, just to define that.
Yeah, what do you mean by agency level hard, just for clarity?
Well, agency level, and if you work in advertising, that means long hours,
Yes.
a lot of demands from the client, and really hard in terms of all levels, stress levels.
Okay.
Yeah, so after I got my first promotion, my very first promotion, I was awarded with double my workload, a little bit of a glorious title, and a $200 promotion. So I was like, great, it's my first promotion, but I only got $200. And as you know, in Singapore, $200 will only get you a dinner and drinks over the weekend. So it was really disappointing for me, but I came back to HR and I told them, maybe you can give me more things like a training or other benefits. And they said, sorry, no, it's just a 200 increase in the promotion. So I said, okay, give me access to the CEOs. And they said, what kind of access? And I said, coffee access, coffee talk, whatever, lunch. And they say, okay, we'll give you that because that's the easiest to give. It doesn't challenge their budgets. So I was there, 20-year-old junior starting in my career, having a coffee talk with a 50-year-old gray-haired CEO. It was really awkward, but I had nothing to lose. You can just imagine, right? But I had nothing to lose. So I asked them, what's the best career advice you can give me? What are the mistakes you've made in your career? What's the learnings that you can share with me? And from that coffee time with the different CEOs, I've learned so much. They've given me the best advice that up to this day, I would say is very useful in my career and also in my personal life.
And what did they tell you? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, funny enough. Well, they said when you're at 50, 60 years old, right? You've seen and experienced everything. And they told me, look, you are at the glorious stage in your life, from 20 to about 35, you're at the best stage in your life where you have good health, really good energy, and obviously not a lot of responsibility. So at that point in time, you give it to yourself, because the best brand that you'll ever work on is yourself. So that's the time that you work hard, but at the same time you make sure that you give it to yourself. That means that um, you need to invest on yourself in terms of what makes you feel happy and what makes you feel alive. If it's traveling, spending time with your family, etc. And I've also learned financial advices from them. So at early stage in my life, I learned to diversify my investments, etc. So I've learned a lot of things that, a 20-year-old advertising agency junior wouldn't have thought so.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's
Yeah.
such a great negotiation tactic. It's like, what can the other person give you that costs them nothing, that is really valuable to
Yeah,
you?
yeah, 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 yeah.
So was that your idea, or did someone suggest that to you? It seems incredibly sage for a 20-year-old.
Well, I asked for training, which they didn't give, because obviously it's cost to the company, right? So I was just thinking, how else can I learn? And I can
Right.
only learn from people who have more experience than me. So I did ask for
Why not
access
the
and
C?
coffee time, right? It's not really a training, it's just coffee time.
Yeah,
So
but why not
yeah.
ask for the CEO? Brilliant. So, so next question: what has been the best investment of your time, energy, or money in your career?
I think it's always been people and good relationships. For me, it has worked a lot, because especially in Asia, relationships are very, very important, because here it's not as straightforward in terms of doing business as compared to US or Europe. So good relationship fosters trust, and when you have trust, it leads to new opportunities, new business, new clients, and then it leads to a new set of relationship that will then give birth to a new cycle of business and opportunities.
So, can you help the audience understand what are the
Yeah.
relationships between East and West there in terms of
Yeah, I think,
relationships?
yeah, I mean, for example, in the US or in Europe, right? You go to a meeting, you straightforward, you go to, okay, what are our objectives? What are we trying to achieve, etc. And that's all totally fine, and that's not rude. Whereas compared to in Asia, you need to go for a coffee or for a lunch or for a dinner, and you need to warm it up with, how are you? How is your daughter doing? How's your pet, etc. So you need to have those conversations um, to make them warm up to you first, and then you talk business. Because if you go there straight, this is what I want to do, um, sometimes in other cultures, like in Japan, um, it tends to be a little bit rude.
Right. Okay,
Mm.
that is very, very interesting and important information for a lot of
Yeah,
us, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. I mean, just the simple way of giving out your name card and the simple way of shaking hands and bowing is very different from East and West.
And so, when you say the best investment has been in those relationships, can you be more specific about how you've done that?
I think it's really to invest time. In terms of time, you really need to spend time with them, take them out for coffee, or just even text them, how are you, how are you doing, and in terms of obviously get to know them on a personal level, not just all talk about career and what you're trying to achieve. So it needs to go in parallel of knowing them personally, and at the same time progressing your project with them.
And would you say that is true across all the APAC regions, or is it specific to Singapore, or like, is it more or less important in different areas?
Actually, Singapore is quite progressive. It's almost like Europe and US, wherein you can talk straight business. But on other areas like Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, um, and Japan, obviously you have to do more a bit of entertaining and relationship.
So, what new beliefs and behaviors have you taken on board in the last few years that you weren't told about when you were 20 by the CEO? What new beliefs or behaviors have
Yeah.
changed your work life?
I think coming on board at Arsenal, I learned to establish core values because Arsenal is a very much value driven club, and every decision that they make sure that it's within their core values. So I was like, okay, this is something new, and I want to apply it personally in my own life. So I have established my own personal values, and within those values, I have also established work values, which is a subset of my personal core values.
And have
A little
you?
bit deep.
No, not at all. It's fascinating. So, have you written these values down? Have you done like a deck
Yeah,
or
yeah,
a
yeah,
poster,
yeah,
or tell me? Like, I would love to hear what some of those things are. If
yeah.
you're
So
comfortable
for
with sharing those.
Yeah, of course, of course. Some of my work values are, for example, creativity, right? I need to be in an environment that allows me to be creative. And second is challenge. I need to always learn something new or achieve something new. And obviously, relationships. I need to work with people. I can't just be stuck in my desk working by myself. um, and recognition at work, and balance. So if you have those core values, for me, it can be a guideline for you whether or not you will say yes or no to a certain project, or whether or not you will pick a fight with a client or a colleague, or whether or not you will entertain a job offer. These are the values that you need to consider.
And do you hold all your values equally, or does recognition trump balance, or how does that work?
I think there's some values that have more weight, but then obviously you always consider all of them.
And do you require your team to do this as well, or is this standardized at a business level?
No, not on a not it's standardized on a business level, which means that the company, as a company, Arsenal Football Club has its own core values, but it's not, let's say, they don't push their employees to have one too. But I learned from that and I applied it to my own personal values.
So, is working out what your values are and articulating them to yourself something you would advise a new arrival in the industry to do, like a smart driven student? Is that important to understand your values straight away, and what else would you advise a newcomer to the industry to do if they wanted to be successful?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have your values, um, if you're starting in the industry, right? Or actually just in life, per se, you need to have your values. Your values change as you progress, but it's important that you have them there as a guideline to how you see yourself and how you see yourself in the industry that you're working at. And well, sorry, in terms of advice, I think, establish your values, identify your mentors, because your mentors have thread and thrived in the road that you're trying to take, and subscribe to marketing publications so that you're always up to date with what's new.
And so, can we just touch on mentors? Have you had the same
Yeah.
mentors throughout your career, or how often have you changed them? How do you identify them? How do you approach them? Really keen to understand how you do that.
Yeah. So for me, I've identified key people that I look up to, and then I approach them, and then I speak to them on, can you be my mentor specifically on this trait? Because I can see that you, for example, I can see that you present very well, you sell very
Mm.
well. So can you mentor me on this? And then, different people have different skill sets. So when I see someone, doesn't necessarily need to be, the CEO or CFO. When I see a person that I think has a really good trait that I want to learn, I just personally approach them and ask them to be my mentor.
I've never heard of that tactic before.
No.
Certainly my perception of mentors is you go to a kind of Swiss Army knife person that can do everything, but like, you're already good at presenting. Tell me how to do it. I love that. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
So,
so it's just the mentors that I've had, I still have them now, but what I think is I'm increasing as I move along. So because if you want to always progress, right? You always want to learn a new skill. So therefore, your previous mentors maybe doesn't have those skills, so you need to find a new one.
right. Okay. Fantastic. So, to someone who is new to the industry, and actually people who are less so, what is a good way to approach a mentor? Is it like in person? Do you do it by email? Do you send them a tweet saying, you're already good at X? Can you tell me how to do it? It sounds like something you've done a
Yeah.
few times. If you could help us
Yeah, yeah.
understand that.
Yeah, so for example, if I go to conferences and I see a good speaker or I meet someone very interesting, sometimes you don't get their contact details on the same day, but I try to search them online, learn more things about them, and approach them on LinkedIn. Or now we're all so connected, right? You can approach them to different channels like LinkedIn or sometimes social media as well. So that's one. And another one, if in your own work environment where you're exposed to maybe someone that you look up to, it can be your own boss or a colleague or a director at a different department, then you can just, come up to them and approach them.
Yeah, I think that's true. We can often be surrounded by mentors, but don't necessarily cash in on that possibility. I think that's a great bit of advice. So before we get onto your shiny new object, really curious to know how you want people to remember your career.
Good one. I think I want to be, well, remembered as a brave marketeer that creatively solves challenges and makes work fun and get things done before the weekend.
You like to be remembered as a brave marketeer who creatively solves challenges with fun and before the weekend. That is the best
Yes.
answer to that question I've heard. That's fantastic. Cool. So thanks for answering that so succinctly. If you love all things innovation and want to understand how brands plan to emerge stronger from the current situation, don't forget to check out MadFest London on the 11th and 12th of November. My good friend Dan at MadFest knows how to put on a cracking event, and there's always plenty of amazing speakers, beer and cool people to meet. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. And what is your shiny new object? Can you describe it to the audience, please?
Yeah, it's something maybe unexpected for this podcast, but it is actually charismatic and effective communication.
Okay, what is that exactly?
I think for me as an Asian woman, having grown up here and educated in the Philippines, which is a third world country, communication is a big challenge. And from experience here in Asia, working in a very diverse environment, there's a lot of barriers, like, language is already a barrier. And then you have big cultural differences. When you say this, it doesn't mean this in other culture. So to have a effective communication is already a challenge, but a charismatic one is an even bigger challenge, because effective is good, but charismatic is inspirational. That's what I feel. And being an Asian woman, I've always been amazed by my English and European colleagues, because they're always so outspoken and literally they speak their mind. And it fascinates me that they never ran out of words to say. And I mean, as an Asian woman, we were trained not to speak our mind. It was the opposite. We were trained to keep quiet, don't complain, follow your parents, and then after your parents, follow your husband's lead. So I think in a corporate setting, personally, I'm just asking myself, this was my training during my formative days. So in a corporate setting, how do I start to even have the confidence to say something and not to keep quiet? That's first. And then second, how do I organize my thoughts and then flesh it out to words that hopefully make sense? And then I think the third step is an even bigger challenge, which is hopefully I deliver a message that somehow inspires devotion. So those are the things that I'm still, kind of obsessed nowadays, how to get it right. So that's my shiny new object.
And that sounds like a shiny new object for you, but also for your generation and the next generation of Asian female marketers, right? So
Yes.
this is something that needs to change. I'd say is this something that you are helping others change the industry, or is this like an internal challenge that you're struggling with?
I think you're right when you say that it's an industry challenge. You have some Asian women who are actually educated in the States or who grew up in Europe and then went back to Asia to be marketeers, and for them, I think it's a different story than with us who grew up here and were trained to really not speak our mind. So I think it's a work in progress, and how we kind of go through it is to find other people like us or other women like me who is trying to understand and be an expert in this area and improve in it.
So I had a really interesting chat with a contact of mine that I knew from the UK when I was in Singapore, an English guy. And this was 6 months ago. And we met up in Singapore, and he said that he'd come back to the UK very briefly to speak at a conference. And he could not believe the amount of content at the conference that was about diversity and inclusion. And he
Yeah.
said that the business cultural difference between the UK and Singapore or Asia Pacific was really staggering. And I have to be honest, I'm quite taken aback by your comments uh, that anyone in this industry in 2019 would feel like that they didn't have a right to say anything because of their gender or their background. Now I know that isn't uniformly true, and the industry has a long way to go. And
Yeah.
I'm part of that change as well. I'm not perfect. I'm not claiming to be for a minute, but obviously support that change as much as I can. But it it is quite shocking that you, and certainly in your position in authority and influence, would still feel like that in any way. So
Yeah, and
what would you like to see the industry do differently to support that change?
I think it begins at home, because the biggest struggle is at home. Because if my my family or my parents doesn't support this, then how can I even proceed with it, right? And then it starts at home. So if your family or your immediate environment supports you, then that would be very much encouraging, right? And then the industry as well. So I think we are growing in that aspect, where in Singapore and in most parts of Asia, it's already encouraged for women to have a career, and for women to progress in their career.
And do you feel that the support from home is something that's happening? Do you feel the tide is turning, or is it something that uh, is an ongoing problem or threat to uh, women with a similar background as you having the impact that you were after?
Yeah, I think it's still in an early days in terms of markets like, India or Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines. It's still in its early days, because in those markets, majority of women are still expected to just get married and have kids and, be wives. So it's not still encouraged in those markets. But I think this year, just in terms of sports and football, women's football has already progressed. So I think, like what I said, it's still in its early days, but I think over the years, w- we will, hopefully, we will overcome that. But
So,
I think it will still be a lot of years ahead of us.
so if someone was listening to this podcast in one of the markets that you just mentioned, who felt that they were not getting that support at home, and wanted to follow in your footsteps and wanted to be charismatic and effective with their communication, but didn't feel that they could, what would your advice to them be?
I think first you have to be really passionate and true that you want it, because if it contradicts what you want and your values, then it's very hard. So I think, like, going back to values, right? You need to make sure that this is something that you want and you're passionate about. And eventually you will have a lot of obstacles in your family and in your society and in the industry. But as you go along, you will not see them as obstacles, but as challenges. And as you
Mm.
overcome them, it will be more of an achievement for you rather than always a struggle to push through.
Right, and I really like the way that you tie that back to your values. You make a barrier, you turn that barrier into a challenge, and if your value is to overcome challenges, then you should do it. Especially if you can get it done by Friday as well, or by the
Correct.
weekend. But
And drinks on a weekend.
yeah, but the one word that I just want to discuss a little bit from your
Yeah.
shiny new object is charismatic, and it's oddly it's not a word that I hear used a lot in certainly in the UK, like effective communication, hitting targets, KPIs. We're
Yeah.
becoming a very kind of results driven industry, and obviously with all the different digital KPIs that are available, and certainly my business is 100% geared around that. But the idea
Yeah.
of charisma, the idea of charm, the idea of warmth and persuasion is that table stakes? Do you think is that a given, or is that an opportunity for the industry to grow?
I think you're spot on when you mentioned the markets, because I think in Europe or in the US, charismatic is not really needed in terms of doing business. But I think, again, going back to Asia, relationships are very important, and to be able to build a relationship or build a good rapport to even initiate a conversation, you need to be charismatic. So I think in the market where I'm working on, it's not just effective communication, but charismatic and effective communication.
Well, Anne, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for giving me a very new perspective on the challenges that you've had coming into the industry, and challenges that unfortunately are going to be present for quite a while. But I think you've given some tools and advice, whether that's having strong values or demanding a cup of coffee with the CEO, both of which I think could work really well. So thank you. If someone wanted to get in touch with you to discuss any of these points, how would you like
Yeah.
them to reach out?
Well, I have my email, or I'm in social media as well.
So like
You
LinkedIn
want
or
me to give it
Twitter?
here, or
No,
yeah,
yeah,
I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on social media. That
fantastic.
means
And thank you so
yeah.
much. You've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure, and looking forward to next week.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days. or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.